Hello and welcome to Global Lens. Over the next 30 minutes, we put the spotlight on all the top stories from around the world. I'm Parikshit Luthra. These are the top global stories we are tracking. We're very close to a trade deal with India, says US President Donald Trump once again claims the deal will open up India. The Indian negotiating team is scheduled to continue talks in Washington today. Top US bankers bat for the Federal Reserve's independence on the back of Trump's public feud with Jerome Powell. David Solomon of Goldman Sachs says one should fight to preserve the Fed's independence. Brian Moynihan of Bank of America says that a stable central bank is important to the country. The president of Syria accuses Israel of trying to ignite chaos in the country after Israeli military strikes hit the heart of Damascus. The attacks in Gaza continues with over 90 people being killed in the last 24 hours, including 30 who were waiting in a queue for food assistance. Straight to the global market action. Asian markets trade mixed after US President Donald Trump announced a preliminary trade deal with Indonesia, imposing a 19% tariff on its exports. South Korea's Kospi ended flat, while Japan's Nikkei gained 0.5%. Shanghai markets edged marginally higher. Back home, Indian markets closed with minor losses. Sensex fell 375 points and Nifty settled just above the 25,100 mark, dragged down by banking and IT stocks. Meanwhile, European markets reversed early gains to close lower, and Wall Street opened in the green thanks to strong earnings and positive economic data. Our top story this evening, US President Donald Trump has once again hinted at reaching a trade agreement with India soon. Speaking to reporters, Trump said the deal will open up India. This comment comes as India's Commerce Ministry officials are in DC as negotiations continue. The statement also comes a day after Trump announced a trade deal with Indonesia and added a deal with India is progressing along the same lines.
We had one yesterday, that was announced. We have another one coming up, maybe with India. I don't know. We're in negotiation. When I send out a letter, that's a deal. In other words, that's a deal. They don't want to ever say that. Oh, how many deals have you made? The best deal we can make is to send out a letter. We're very close to a deal with India where they open it up. Indonesia yesterday was, it wasn't an open country, now it is.
As India and US continue hectic parleys on trade, Trump's trade tirade has hit many nations around the world. Trump has threatened BRICS nations with 10% tariffs on imports from those countries. Trump said, and I quote, "Anybody that's in BRICS is getting a 10% charge pretty soon. If they're a member of BRICS, they're going to have to pay a 10% tariff." End of quote. That's not all. Trump also threatened 100% secondary tariffs on Russia if Putin does not end the war with Ukraine in 50 days. This would mean that countries that do trade with Russia, like India, China, Brazil, and other nations, would face these steep tariffs. Meanwhile, US senators in a joint statement said that any nation that fuels Putin's war machine by buying cheap Russian oil and gas could see the imposition of tariffs as high as 500%. Does President Trump only want to score a trade win with India, or is he seeking India's unwavering support for America's continued dominance as a superpower? How should India navigate an unpredictable Trump administration? Joining me now is Milan Vaishnav, Senior Fellow and Director of the South Asia Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He has authored an article in the Foreign Affairs magazine, and in this piece, he argues that Washington's era of strategic altruism towards India is over, and now in an uncertain world, there is need for a role reversal. It is time for India to be more generous with Washington, D.C. Do you believe, Milan, and thank you for being with us, do you believe this is possibly the reason that we're not getting a trade deal with US right now? This is why it's taking long, because Donald Trump believes it's payback time?
I think so. I mean, the basic premise of the article is that since the year 2000, when US-India relations began to steadily grow into the strategic embrace that we've enjoyed for the past quarter century, there has been this understanding in Washington, really across Democratic and Republican administrations, that India's rise was inherently good for the United States. And so if the U.S. invested economic, diplomatic, technological, security resources into India's rise, we as Americans didn't necessarily have to ask for instant gratification, right? Because again, a peaceful, secure, powerful, prosperous India was inherently in America's interest. And I think Donald Trump, particularly in his second term, and I think it's important to distinguish his second term from his first, is not in the mood for continuing with this altruism. Many people have described the president's style as transactional. I think that doesn't quite capture it. I would say that he wants the United States to exert dominance over all of America's partners, including its friends, allies, and partners such as India. And so we're in a very different setup in Trump 2.0 than we were in Trump 1.0. And I think that's going to have an impact on the trajectory of US-India relations.
But Milan, what do you think we can really give to Washington? You know, we have these red lines on agriculture and dairy. We've already said that we will buy more defense equipment, and we're talking about buying P-8I aircraft, reconnaissance aircraft from the United States. We're talking about a GE 414 deal. In fact, the delays on the US part. There are other deliveries such as Apache helicopters, and all of them have been delayed on the part of the United States. We would want to buy more, but you know, there is a track record of delays as well. And then there is some sort of doubt about F-35s because this aircraft, earlier versions have been with Pakistan. So keeping in mind some of these red lines, what can we really offer?
I mean, I think it's a very good question. I mean, the Trump administration came into office, and I think they made three very concrete asks, right? The first is that unless the US and India could negotiate a trade accord, India would be subject to 26% tariffs. At the present moment, those have been deferred. India is subject to a 10% tariff. And I'm hoping that we'll see a deal relatively soon. I think part of the issue with why we haven't seen a deal is not necessarily due to India's intransigence, although there may be part of that when it comes to agricultural goods, but also shifting goalposts on the part of the US administration. It's very hard for America's partners to figure out where exactly it wants to end up in these negotiations. I think the second is on defense, as you mentioned. I don't think that anyone in Washington expects that the US is going to overnight end its decades-long reliance on Russian arms imports, but they would like to see the speed with which the U.S. is seen as a kind of primary or principal defense supplier increase, just as it's increased with France, Israel, and others. And I think the third, as you mentioned, is on energy, where I think there's two components. I think the first is the United States would like to see India purchase more LNG gas and oil from the United States, but they would also want India to amend its civil nuclear liability laws, which have really prevented the U.S. and U.S. companies from investing in India's civilian nuclear industry. So I think that you're quite right when you said that India has really moved on all of these fronts. But this is an administration that is thinking about the here and now, and I'll constantly ask the question, what have you done for me lately? So there's a constant game, unfortunately, in my view, that friends and partners have to play, which is trying to show and trying to give this president quick wins.
Right. I would also like to ask you, you've mentioned in your article that you believe that that many in the US have always believed that India's upward trajectory will eventually shift the Asian balance in favor of the United States. Do you now believe that, be it the Democrats or Republicans, somehow they don't believe that India's rise will necessarily shift the balance in the US's favor? Look at the kind of attention the US president is giving to Pakistan right now.
Well, let's leave Pakistan aside for a second, although happy to come back to it. Let's just focus on India. I think there has been a bipartisan consensus that I believe is still there in the Democratic Party. It's still there in the traditional Republican Party. Where it is sort of losing out is in the MAGA component of the Republican Party, which of course is arguably its biggest piece. Where, if you step back, I think political leaders of all stripes have understood the importance that India plays in the Asia Pacific as a bulwark potentially against a rising authoritarian expansionist China, but also because, it is a future market for American companies. There is a massive migration corridor of Indians coming to the United States and settling here, more than 5.2 million people of Indian origin reside in the United States. I think these are arguments that are well rehearsed, that are well known. I think in Trump 2.0, however, these arguments don't hold as much water, right? So India presenting itself as a potential democratic counterweight to China in the Indo-Pacific just doesn't have the sort of resonance that it used to have. So, if we were in a Kamala Harris administration, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Frankly, if we were in a Mitt Romney or administration or a Nikki Haley administration, we also wouldn't be having this conversation. So this is something that I think is very peculiar to and specific to the Make America Great Again movement and the way that Trump in his second iteration has decided to look at the world.
What I would also like to understand from you, you're speaking about Donald Trump's inner circle and also the Make America Great Again vote bank and politicians close to him who strongly owe allegiance to this vote bank as well. Now, what do these people really want of India? We can buy more energy. We can reduce the trade deficit. $45 billion, it's not very difficult to bridge. You can buy more defense equipment. The foreign secretary in February had said we will buy $25 billion worth of energy from the US. So you can do that. But this Trump administration is constantly changing goalposts. Their demands are changing. Even those earlier trade deals, which have been honored by successive US administrations, are being broken, are being torn apart, and Trump is wanting more. So even if we give in those concessions, we buy more, what is the kind of guarantee that 6 months later Trump won't change his mind?
There's very little guarantee, and I think this is a real fact that America's friends and partners, whether the United Kingdom, Japan, France, India, Indonesia, name your country, they're all feeling the same situation. And my basic point is, I think the best India can do is to try and give wins that it can live with, that don't cause it massive domestic political backlash, in an attempt essentially to try to run out the clock on Trump. Trump is going to be president for another 3.5 years. There's nothing that India can do about that, or anyone else, until the next election in 2028. But I think India has to act on the assumption that there will be a different president come 2029 January. And hopefully this intense kind of transactional attitude will subside. And the reason that I think the United States is still important is severalfold. I think one, India has quite ambitious goals for becoming a developed country by the year 2047. That's going to require foreign capital, foreign investment coming from the United States above all others. When it comes to India's own insecure neighborhood, we've seen already on the battlefield that during Operation Sindoor, India was fighting not just Pakistan, but Pakistan and China together. I think the Indian military at the highest levels have made that very clear about the extent of collusion they saw on the battlefield between China and Pakistan. And when it comes to technology, India is still seeking that technology transfer from the United States. I mean, India aspires to be a power when it comes to cutting edge technologies like artificial intelligence, but it doesn't necessarily have the domestic resources to create that capacity. So they're looking to foreign companies, whether it's Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, and so on and so forth, to help them build that capacity. So, this is, India is stuck between a rock and a hard place. I certainly acknowledge that. But I think, a strong US-India relationship is in India's long-term interest. And so they have to find creative ways of weathering this, what is hopefully a temporary storm.
Right. Very interesting talking to you, Milan, about your article in the Foreign Affairs magazine about why it's time to placate the United States for India's larger long-term strategic interests. We've completely run out of time, but thanks once again for being with us. Let's now take a quick look at the other headlines. In a tragic incident, 69 people lost their lives and several are missing after a fire broke out at a hypermarket in eastern Iraq. As per reports, 14 charred bodies have been recovered and 45 people were rescued from the scene. Health officials have confirmed the identification of 59 victims. A Wall Street Journal report has cited black box recordings and claimed the captain of the doomed Air India plane turned off the fuel flow to engines. The junior pilot reportedly panicked and asked the captain why he turned off the switches. An investigator's body has said it is premature to draw any conclusions. The US House of Representatives has advanced a couple of crypto bills to the floor for debate. The Genius Act, which would establish a federal framework for stablecoins, has already been passed by the Senate and requires only the House approval. The two others, including a bill that would bar the Federal Reserve from establishing a central bank digital currency, will move through the House first. India's iPhone exports have risen 53% on an annual basis in the first half of 2025. As per data from Canalys, nearly 24 million units were shipped out of India, up from 15.6 million units in the first half of 2024. The United States emerged as the main export destination, accounting for 78% of iPhones shipping from India. Time for a short break, but coming up next, is US President Donald Trump's trade policy losing their efficacy as countries consider imposing retaliatory tariffs on US? We speak with Professor Christos Cabolis, Chief Economist at IMD World Competitiveness Centre, to understand the phenomenon. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Global Lens. The Trump administration is adamant that it will stick to August 1st deadline to impose the trade tariffs on America's trading partners with or without a deal. But the questions remain, will US President Donald Trump extend the deadline yet again? But if he does, how is the market preparing to react this time around? Report suggests markets which initially developed a narrative, Trump always chickens out, can now see through Trump's trade policy. A policy that includes setting tariff levels and then engaging with nations to revise those levels. In Trump's words, it's not chickening out, but negotiation. The situation has started to mildly straighten out for Trump. For instance, the customs duty data, which in a way reinforces Trump's policies. In June, the US customs duty collection has surged as these tariffs gain steam, topping $100 billion for the first time during a fiscal year and helping to produce a surprising $27 billion budget surplus for the month. However, the challenge with regards to reaching an agreement with major trading nations continues to loom. There are some nations like Canada, Brazil, Mexico, EU that are unhappy with the imposed tariffs and have even threatened to retaliate. To understand how Trump's policies are playing out and if these threats are losing their efficacy with countries considering retaliation, we're now joined by Professor Christos Cabolis, Chief Economist at IMD World Competitiveness Centre. Professor Christos, thank you very much for joining us. Let me begin by asking you, do you think Donald Trump's tariff threats are now seeing diminishing returns?
Thank you for the invitation, and it's a pleasure for me to join you and your audience. In some ways, I think that the tariff threats have lost the shock value that they used to have. But that does not mean that the threats do not matter anymore. On the contrary, what they do is they bring a certain amount of disruption and instability that essentially creates a lot of commotion in the markets. The markets may not go up and down, but the trust in the stability of the trade system is affected. Within a very short period of time, in April, we went from an average tariff on US imports from 2% in up over 20% in just a couple of weeks. So this creates a lot of issues. Countries do not know what exactly is going to happen. As you said in your comments, companies do not perform long-term plans. They pause on capital investments, and particularly in manufacturing and in logistics.
Right. The European Union has threatened retaliation with $84 billion worth of goods with the US. How do you think this will hit the United States? And do you think the European Union will go through with this threat?
This is a very delicate point and a very good question. And I wish I knew the answer. But essentially what is happening is that The EU-US trade relationship is the largest globally, both in terms of trade of goods, in terms of trade of services, something that we don't mention that much, and FDI on both sides. So we've noticed that there was a pause until August 1st. The European Union was claiming that we'll start the retaliation this past Tuesday. In fact, they stopped that as well. So in some respect is wait and see. There are different issues that are in place. If Trump, for instance, imposes a blanket tariff, then the EU has said that they can retaliate, and they can retaliate in terms of regulatory actions, not only tariffs, tech, green energy, data privacy, and so on and so forth. So I think in some respect, there will be a little bit of a tryout to see where exactly and what exactly is going to happen. However, the biggest cost, I don't think that it's a higher prices because of the tariffs. It is the strategic dislocation. It is the losing of efficiency, the losing of trust in the transatlantic partnership. And without stable rules, everyone hedges. And in that respect, everyone loses.
Right. I would also like to ask you about how do you think the Chinese economy is going to benefit as a result of these tariff wars? Do you expect Europe to start coming closer to China? Is the Chinese economy going to benefit with more countries seeing possibly the Chinese economy, the Chinese government more dependable, more predictable compared to what's happening in the US?
This is very possible. In fact, what we saw from the very start, from the President Trump's tenure, the second time, is that China was much more prepared than any other country. China grew in the second quarter by 5.2%, the GDP. And analysts think that this may slow down, but nevertheless, and that this was because of the front loading of the exporters to us. However, at the same time, as you very shrewdly said, China has tried to create a feedback loop. It tried to build on self-sufficiency in areas that it didn't have before, like semiconductors, AI, energy. It has invested heavily in Belt and Road markets, creating alternative export channels. And these essentially may help to weather out the tariffs by United States. Having said that, essentially, the action of China results in a reaction. They move closer to a reaction from the United States and the European Union that move away from China because China holds back and closer to other places. In that respect, I think that China and the European Union may find themselves closer. There is a very high possibility for that. Yes.
Right. The impact on India, how do you think India stands to benefit as a result of these changing trade partnerships, the very dynamic trade situation and tariff situation we're looking at?
Indeed. So India has a lot to gain and a lot to lose depending on how the relationship with the United States is going to be built in a couple of weeks. Because they're facing several sectors from which are very important. The Indian economy are facing hikes from 10% to 26% August 1st. So on the other hand, though, so this can harm the industries of India. However, on the other side, India has many different options. If I remember correctly, in 22 out of 30 key US import sectors, India has a strong competitive position. And in addition to that, India has a very large market, which can help a lot, and has a real opportunity to as with China, to deepen trade and regulatory ties with the European Union. So depending on whether United States materialize the threats, the tariffs, I think that EU may allow India to stay globally a very important power.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. And my final question to you would be, how do you think the European economy is going to be impacted by the end of the year in terms of slowing growth? We have seen the rearmament of Europe. United States had made it very clear that Europe and many other countries have treated US very badly over the years. Now Europe is on its own. How are we going to see Europe's economy shaping up by the end of Donald Trump's term 3 years later?
It really depends on whether European Union will succeed to integrate. We are discussing about Europe as being one economy, but in reality, we have many important economies that need to integrate certain aspects. They need to integrate, for instance, the capital markets. They need to integrate the fiscal policies, and they need to integrate the strategy towards self-defense, whatever the issues related with defense are. So Europe moves slowly towards that direction. But I think the sooner these integrations take place and the sooner the European countries align towards some important elements, the better the position will be in the end of President Trump's tenure.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Christos Cabolis, for joining us with that interesting perspective. Clearly, the world is going through a lot of uncertainty, and it's going to impact investments, and it will lead to slow growth over the next few months. Let's hope that all these tariff threats and trade tensions finally settle down somewhere. Let's move on and get you a quick look at stories from around the world. The United Kingdom will lower the legal voting age to 16 years during the next general elections. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that 16 and 17-year-olds are old enough to go out to work and old enough to pay taxes, and hence they can have a say in what their taxes are used for. This is going to be the biggest change to UK's electorate since 1969. Lionel Messi's record-breaking run of multi-goal games in Major League Soccer came to an end as Inter Miami suffered a 0-3 defeat to FC Cincinnati. Evander, the midfielder for Cincinnati, scored 2 goals in the match. Messi is the first player in the league history to score more than 1 goal in 5 consecutive matches. Arsenal has signed Olivia Smith from Liverpool for a record $1.3 million. This makes her the most expensive women's soccer player. The fee surpasses the $1.1 million that Chelsea paid Naomi Girma from San Diego earlier this year. Smith has signed a long-term contract with Arsenal and will wear the number 15 jersey. India's R. Praganand stunned world number 1 Magnus Carlsen at the Las Vegas leg of the Freestyle Grand Slam Tour last night. The 19-year-old secured the victory in 39 moves with the white pieces. The win helped the young Grandmaster top Group White and book a spot in the quarterfinals. Meanwhile, Carlsen was knocked out of contention for a place in the winner's bracket after losing to Armenian Grandmaster Levon Aronian. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese indulged in panda diplomacy during his visit to China. He visited a panda breeding facility in Chengdu to meet a former Australian resident. Funi was loaned to the Adelaide Zoo in 2009, but she returned to China after failing to breed in Australia. Albanese referred to Funi as a great ambassador to China. That's all the time we have on Global Lens. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.